everyone, welcome to the Midpoint Review. I'm your host, AJ Tabando, and we've got a great show for you today. I'm joined by Kate Julian, who is zeroing in on her 40s and learning a lot about herself in the process. Kate has built a career spanning politics and government relations, but joins us today to talk about how a late-in-life diagnosis of autism has shaped how she understands herself, her relationships, and her work. So many people are opening up to the realizations that neurodiversity is far more prevalent than we grew up believing. Whether it's autism, ADHD, or other neurological traits, our generation's openness to navigating mental health journeys and talking about it openly has led us to new understandings of how our minds work. Gaining that understanding later in life is groundbreaking and cycle breaking, and I'm so grateful to Kate for coming on here and sharing her story. Before we get started, shout out to our sponsor, Habit Coffee Club. Habit's world-famous diner roast tastes like you think coffee should taste. Smooth, rich, and full of natural sweetness, it was the coffee that finally got me off sugar and showed me how good coffee, just coffee, really can be. But don't take my word for it. Visit www.habitcoffeeclub.com to order a bag or sign up for a subscription and use the promo code midpoint at checkout for 20% off. That's www.habitcoffeeclub.com. All right, let's start the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Midpoint Review. I'm super excited for today's guest, Kate Julian. Kate is a nearly 40 Alberta expat, now based in Toronto, where she lives with her husband, her awesome 5-year-old daughter, and an exceptionally fluffy cat. She works in government relations and healthcare by day and winds down in the evening with mindless TV and said fluffy cat. Don't we all wish we had a really nice fluffy cat to wind down with? She's got a fascinating story about how it can sometimes take until the midpoint of life before you really understand who you are and why you are the way you are. And I'm excited to dig into that with her today. So Kate, welcome to the show. Yeah, great to have you. So for the listeners who might not be familiar with you, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Kate. I'm a recovering political staffer. Spent a long time. Yeah, you understand that.
Represent.
Spent a lot of time in that world, spent a little bit of time in the public service, and now for the past couple of years been in the private sector doing government relations work in the health policy space, which has been great.
Awesome. And so you are zeroing in on 40.
I am.
For us all. It comes from, and it's not so scary. It's not so scary being on the other side. But tell us a little bit about what this sort of moment in time means for you in your life and kind of where you're at.
Yeah, it is scary zeroing in on 40. I've got like 9 months to go. Not that I'm, counting now.
Just counting.
But I really have spent most of my life trying to figure out who I am. I think that's true of a lot of people. I think a lot of people struggle to figure out what drives them, who they are, how their brain works until they're a little later in life and things have, calmed down into a bit of a steady state. What is a little bit different about my journey, although I wouldn't say that it's uncommon, is I found out about 18 months ago that I have ADHD. And then earlier this year, I found out that I am also autistic. So double header. It answered a ton of questions for me about why I am the way I am. It makes a lot of sense if I look at what I'm like now, what my childhood has like, the way that I've related to people, my interests, the kind of work I've chosen. It really forms what I like to call a unifying framework for a lot of bits and pieces of my life and bits and pieces about who I am that I really struggled to understand for a long time.
That's incredible. What an incredible sort of moment to better understand yourself, and particularly for something like that it does really create that unifying framework of how your mind works, right? Which then creates the world you live in and how you experience it. What were some of the things that suddenly made sense to you as you started to better understand autism and ADHD and how that impacted you?
I've always struggled with a lot of sensory things. I don't like being in loud places. I'm really sensitive to temperature. I have like really strong likes and dislikes when it comes to food. I've always seemed to notice things in a way that other people don't. Like most people are fine just getting out of the shower. When I get out of the shower, I can like feel all the little drips of water running down my body, which is weird and annoying, and apparently not something that everyone experiences. I've learned a lot about sensory processing differences as part of this journey. And one thing that has been most helpful for me is to understand how I deal with like sound and audio. So if I'm in like a restaurant talking to someone and there's also background noise and there's also music, most people's brains filters out the background and filters out the music and can just focus on what their dinner guest is saying to them. But my brain doesn't do that. So everything comes in at the same volume. So I used to think that I had like a hearing impairment, and I even tried wearing hearing aids for a while because I was having trouble like following in conversations and stuff. But it's not that at all. It's just that my brain doesn't differentiate and filter. So everything comes in with the same volume, with the same level of importance. And it takes a lot to really like focus in on what someone is saying in a conversation. So the sensory stuff was a big one. And the other one that was really big for me was like social dynamics and relating to other people. It's something that I've really struggled with over the years. As a kid, I had a really, really hard time making friends. I wanted friends. I just didn't really understand how to do that and how to execute on that. And I didn't really understand why people thought I was different. Like I felt different. I had this like weird spidey sense that something was off. Other kids like obviously noticed too, because they, I think, struggled to relate to me. So understanding that what was going on behind all of that wasn't that there's like something wrong with me, wasn't that I'm unlikable, wasn't that I was, really at fault in that situation. It's just I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I reacted to things in ways that people thought were, weird or not appropriate or aggressive. I've had a lot of people say to me that when they first meet me, they thought that I like did not like them or like actively hated them, which is not true at all. I just have a very direct style of communication, a direct way of talking to people, and understanding that for me, a lot of that stuff is because I am autistic, helps me understand why people react to me the way that they do, and also helps me decide if I want to work on changing any of those things, either for specific relationships or when I'm, out in the world and strangers look at me and think I'm mad. That's just sort of my default face.
Do I want to work on RBF, or am I okay with keeping people at a distance? It's a good question.
Do I want to spend the energy trying to figure out how to say something in a way that is less likely to hurt someone's feelings if it's something that is like true and needs to be communicated? Like that is usually a yes. I understand that not everyone likes to like receive feedback or hear things that way, even though I prefer to say it that way and I prefer people to speak to me like that. So like that's one that I'm really willing to work on and change. The RBF, like though, it's like it's either RBF or some creepy looking fake smile.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. For all the complaints about people with RBF, it's like, do you really want to see me walk around with a constant smile on my face? Like, it's unsettling.
No.
Yeah, no, that's what an incredible sort of set of experiences to have, especially at this stage of life when, I think everyone begins to go through a bit of a period of identity reflection and figuring out who they are and who they want to be and how they want to move through the world. And you've accumulated, at this stage of life, enough kind of experience in social settings to start to think about that, but then to layer on this sort of level of newfound self-awareness about, how you're neurologically wired in a way that explains your experiences up to this point and gives you now, it sounds like, a more almost transparent set of tools to decide how you want to navigate forward.
Yeah, that's really what it does. It has helped me figure out what are things that are me differences versus what are things that are, other people's expectations or desires that I just don't want to meet. So it's really helpful to know that I come across as like direct and even aggressive because that's not my intention. So that's something that I can work on and fix. And that is something about me. But then there are also things where, like my husband really loves to listen to loud, like aggressive EDM music in the car, and it makes my brain want to explode. All these layers of sound, all these noises, like in a confined space. And I used to think that I was just like weirdly sensitive. And now I know that, like, no, my brain is actually experiencing this differently than a lot of other people. So he's a lot more like willing to like turn off or like stop whistling around the kitchen when it's been like just too much of a day. So for me, it's been finding a balance about what I want to change about my own behavior and what I want to ask from other people in terms of like changes or accommodations on their side of the equation.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And do you feel like has it changed the relationships that you have with different folks? Like, has it changed? It sounds like it's changed some of the dynamic between you and your husband in
Mhm.
terms of how you guys communicate and maybe understand each other.
Yeah, I think it's helped him understand why I am the way I am with a lot of that stuff. I think it's helped him understand that what he sometimes experiences as being like aggressive is just for me a very like natural and direct and succinct way of speaking. So that doesn't mean I don't need to work on my tone and work on being kinder, but I think it helps him understand that where I'm coming from is not from a place of anger and criticism. It's trying to make sure that I'm like being clear and precise in what I'm saying. So I think it's helped a little on that as well. It's also really helped on the marriage side of things because I can now start figuring out what it is that like puts me over the edge, what it is that makes me irritable and cranky and overwhelmed and like unable to be the nice sunshiny person that I aim to be most of the time. So I can do things like plan for breaks and rests and say like, you go watch the Raps. I'm going to sit in my chair and stare at a tree and listen to a podcast for a while. And he understands that I'm not like upset with him. It's not that I don't want to spend time with him. It's that I need that time to like decompress and recalibrate, or I will get up the next day like a cranky mess. So that kind of stuff's been really helpful.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I think it's so relevant, and I'm so grateful for you to come on here and share this experience so openly, because I think that this is something that a lot of people are going through in different ways. And
Mhm.
and in this moment in time, there's this interesting sort of convergence of a hyper awareness around mental health and neurodiversity, um, and I think a prevalence of it, of various forms of it, that I think we really sort of underestimated for a very long time. And so there's like, on the one hand, it's so much more
Mhm.
out there and talked about. And as people talk about the symptoms, there's a lot more recognition that, oh, maybe this is me. And then at the same time, um, I think that, like I said, when you're at this moment in, your late 30s,
Mhm.
probably mid to late 30s, and, and beyond, like you're starting to just really understand
Yeah.
who you are, or start to really look at things about yourself that maybe you're not happy
Yeah.
with. And that doesn't mean that you're not, happy with how your brain works, but perhaps you're at a point where you're realizing, I feel like I don't understand how I'm navigating through
Mhm.
some of these things, or I don't understand why some things bother me like this. And like, I'm not going to kind of just keep going through, I'm not going to suffer through it anymore, because at the same time, these conversations about like, you don't have to, there's lots of ways you can get help, or just like awareness help, therapy, to better understand who you are, and have the toolbox to
Yeah.
navigate it. I think it's so relevant. And there's so many people in my life who have had these sort of
Mhm.
later stage, like ADHD is a
Yeah.
really common one. To go through, and I think that the more people get to hear these kinds of stories, the more they're going to start hearing themselves
Mhm.
in these stories, and say, you know what, like maybe this thing that I've been just powering through, or suffering through, or feeling bad about, isn't something that I should be judging myself on, but should be talking to somebody about.
And that has been a really huge part of why I want to talk to people about this, because for a long time, like I felt and was directly told that a lot of this stuff was just basically a moral failing on my part. I'm not
Yeah.
empathetic enough. I'm not understanding enough. I don't have resilience when it comes to things like tolerating crowds and loud noises.
Mhm.
It's, my fault that I didn't have friends as a kid because I just, didn't know how to behave. When I was a kid, I got a lot of, drama queen overreaction, all
Mm.
that kind of stuff. And I look back in hindsight and it was really difficult for me because I knew that I was experiencing all of these things in a really like unpleasant and intense way. And I didn't understand why the adults in my life basically just didn't believe me and thought that I was overreacting and being dramatic. So it's been really like validating in a way to get the autism diagnosis. And, I'm not going around doing I told you so dances, but it kind of frees me of a lot of the like self judgment that it's been really hard for me to shake about some of those things that really being told that over and over and over and over again as a kid, especially from like your parents, your family, your teachers, really sinks in.
Mhm.
What I'm hoping in, talking to people about this, whether it be something like more public like a podcast or whether it even just be with friends and family, is that like now we're starting to learn more about things like autism and ADHD, and we're starting to learn more about what they look like in different people. So most of
Mhm.
the research and most of the assessments for autism are done for like most of the medical field is for like white men. So
Right.
there's a lot of women or gender diverse folks who get missed. There's a lot of racialized folks who get missed because it's showing up in a way that the medical establishment doesn't look at and recognize as being autism or ADHD. It looks different, especially for
Mhm.
people who are at the like lower end of the support needs spectrum. People with autism will describe themselves in different ways. Formally in the DSM, there's three like levels of autism, 1, 2, and 3. One is someone who needs like, the least amount of support to function in daily life, and 3 is someone who would need like the most amount of support to function in daily life. I'm on the one end of the spectrum, so I need less support than a lot of other autistic people to work, to personal care, all that kind of stuff. Even then, it looks really different across genders. People have a very
Yeah.
like, stereotypical picture of what they think an autistic kid looks like not communicative, not
Mhm.
a great talker, avoids eye contact, all of winds up toys instead of playing with them, all of that, doesn't want to have friends, all of that sort of thing is what people often think of when they think about autism in kids. But especially in girls, it's not always like that. Like for me, I was an early talker and early reader. I was really good at communicating and expressing myself. I was like isolated, not by choice, but because I had difficulty making friends, even though I wanted to make friends. So, because of those kinds of things, because I was doing well in school, people just thought, okay, it's a bit of an eccentric, smart girl, and, there's nothing else we need to really do to intervene or support here because she's doing well in all her classes. That's like good enough. Let's leave it alone.
Right.
When in
Right.
reality, things on the inside were really, really hard, trying to deal with the like sensory overwhelm when I didn't even know what that was, the isolation that can come from this, the being told that I'm, bad behavior, bad listener, drama queen, all of that kind of stuff that I didn't actually have any control over. I think
Mhm.
that that's one reason why I really want people to be able to learn more so that they consider autism or ADHD or both as a possibility when their kid is having difficulty in some way instead of just looking for what people consider to be the stereotypical markers that you see more often depicted in media and in popular culture.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said. What you said earlier around some of the sort of sense of self that you accumulate when your neurodiversity is overlooked and you are just sort of shamed
Mhm.
into your sense of self because you're not behaving the way
Yeah.
other kids are behaving, or what's wrong with you, or like if you were a good kid you would do this,
Mhm.
or and how the sort of stigma around talking about some of this stuff is so harmful, because not only did your diagnosis get sort of overlooked and delayed for decades,
Mhm.
but then it's, it sounds like you carried a whole bunch of other sort of trauma as a result of that. So to your point around understanding how these things manifest um, in people differently, and particularly for people lower on a spectrum and in a different category level that's not sort of so obvious or stereotypical. Like, what do you think as our generation become parents? You have a 5-year-old, I have an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, right? Like we're now the ones raising that next generation of
Yeah.
kids. Like, what is it that we can be doing differently to recognize that and to just sort of not continue that cycle?
I think considering neurodiversity as a possibility for what's being labeled like bad or disruptive behavior is a big one. A phrase or a concept that I really like is behavior is communication. So if your kid is
Mm.
having huge meltdowns in class, if your kid is lashing out at other students, if your kid has no friends and is really upset by this, look at that and what it can represent, right? Like, why is my kid having these epic meltdowns every day, even though we've had all these conversations about, taking a deep breath, reacting proportionately? Give your kid the benefit of the doubt that what is going on is something that is not within their control and needs support or intervention, as opposed to they're just weak-willed and instead of using their words, they're deciding to have a temper tantrum instead. So that's a big one, I think, is paying attention to what people's behavior is telling you, giving kids the benefit of the doubt about what their motivations or intentions are for things that are being interpreted as bad behavior, and listening to your kids. Like from the time I was really little, I knew there was something, like I would have called it wrong when I was little. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I never felt good. It was getting worse with time. No one believed me that anything was wrong or going on. And if people had believed me, I think it would have really saved me a lot of trouble and a lot of heartache over the years. I had, as like a teenager and a young adult, I had a lot of mental health struggles. I really struggled with eating disorders. I've struggled with addiction. I've struggled with depression and anxiety. And when I was talking to the psychologist who did my aunt about all of this, she said that the path that I sort of went along is really common, especially for women who are at the lower support needs end of the autism spectrum, because they don't have anything, they don't have any way to cope. No one accepts that anything's wrong. So you end up seeing like maladaptive coping strategies like eating disorders and like substance use, because things get to the point, and this is how it was with me, things got to the point that they were so overwhelming that having like 6 drinks at a party really turned all that down and let my brain sort of chill and uninhibited me and let me feel what I thought was more normal in those kind of situations. And then before you know it, you're having like 5 drinks on the couch watching TV and things get out of hand. So I've been sober for like 7 years now, which was a good choice for me. But all to say that there are actual tangible consequences for your kid if this is what's going on with them and you're not noticing and you're not listening and you're not picking up on it. But like, at least for me, I have struggled for a long time with trying to come to terms with how my parents dealt with this when I was a kid. Like, on one hand, they took completely the wrong approach. There was a lot of punishment, a lot of shaming. But on the other hand, they didn't know. They didn't know what autism looked like in little girls. They didn't understand why I was behaving the way I was understanding. They didn't have the information and they didn't have the resources. But I am hopeful, like you say, that our generation will have the information and will have the resources, so that in the same kind of way that if you notice your kid is having, trouble walking and you take them to the doctor to get their ankle checked out, that if you notice your kid is having trouble with eating a variety of foods or super sensitive to itchy clothing or struggling to make friends, that you talk to the doctor about that too and make sure that you are covering off those bases as well.
Thank you so much for just all of this conversation. I think it's so brave of you to just be so open and authentic and transparent and sharing it, because It's so heavy and it's a lot to handle and go through. But like anything that has to do with mental health and our psychology, the reason why we're dealing with so much of this stuff now is because we haven't
Mhm.
talked about it
Yeah.
in the past. And I think all of your words of wisdom here for parents are so helpful. People kind of can make fun of how millennials parent, all they
Mhm.
want around gentle parenting and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like the kind of shame-based parenting that existed in the past
Yes.
carries a level of
Yeah,
toxicity that we are all, cleansing
yeah,
collectively right now,
exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So I want to just shift gears a little
Sure.
bit. And, because I think that when we do talk about autism, even when we're talking about it from the perspective of, that it's not a bad thing, we still talk about all the, you went through a lot of harm to get here
Mhm.
to a point of being able to liberate it. But it's a part of what makes you special, right? And there are strengths that come through seeing the world
Mhm.
differently and having this unique perspective and seeing and feeling things in ways that others might not. So I don't know if this is a funny question, but I'm wondering, as you settle into understanding yourself, what is like what's a positive part
Mhm.
for you of being autistic? What's kind of
Yeah.
your favorite part of
Mhm.
this for you and how it makes you who you are?
I don't know. I think that there are a lot of ways about my autism and how my brain works that have helped me over the years. I think
Mm,
that part of the reason that I'm really good at my job that I'm in now, and I do like government relations work, I do stakeholder works. I have to, you know, convince the government to not do something or to do something. I have to convince the business that I work for that it's okay that government is doing XYZ. I have to bring, 5 or 6 different stakeholders with different sets of interests together and try and get everyone on the same page and, speak with one voice. All that kind of maintaining relationships, consensus building, understanding other people's perspectives is, I think, really related to spending years and years and years and years and years just like watching people and how they behave. Because that stuff doesn't come naturally to me, it's something that I've had to like lean into developing as a skill. So
yeah.
watching how people react to me, watching how people react to each other, noticing what they're saying and whether it actually lines up with what they're doing. All those sorts of emotional and relational dynamics are patterns, and a pattern recognition is something that not all but a lot of people who are autistic are really good at. And so
Mhm.
I think for me, I can see and understand why someone's doing what they're doing, and I'm pretty good at predicting what they're going to do next based on that. So I think that pattern recognition and social interaction that I've really had to actively practice helps me in the relationship building that I do in my job now. I think another area where it has helped me is that it has made me very aware of the challenges that people with different kinds and different levels of disability face in our society. I'm very
Mhm.
supportive of what's called the social model of disability. So, social model of disability is basically that it is not a feature of the individual that makes them disabled. It is how society organizes, structures, builds itself, everything from physical infrastructure to norms and expectations. That is what is disabling. So, if you're
Mhm.
someone who doesn't have use of their legs, you're not disabled unless there's not a ramp into the building. It's
Mhm.
not on you.
That's so
It's on
fascinating. What
society.
a
Or in the neurodivergent space, autism is disabling. Not everyone who has autism would consider themselves to be disabled or to consider features of autism to be disabling. For me, they are. And that's not because there's anything wrong with me. It's because when Loblaws decides how they're going to organize and light their store and that they're going to pump, top 40 in there at maximum volume, they're thinking about the average customer. They're not thinking about people like me. They're not thinking
Mhm.
about how bright neon lights, loud music, constantly moving everything around is going to make it harder for me to go into that store and shop and come out the other end of that experience not feeling like I want to like throw my eggs at the wall in the parking lot. So I think that learning more about the different experiences that people with autism and other disabilities have has been a strength. it has also helped me recognize the amount of like privilege that I do have in this space. I am a white cis woman. If I am completely overwhelmed and, have a meltdown in a store, someone's first reaction is going to be, no, what's happening? Are you all right? If I'm a Black man having an autistic meltdown in a store, I'm probably going to be treated pretty differently. People are going to be like making all kinds of assumptions about why the person's behaving that way that they're not going to make about someone like me. So it's been important for me to listen to and learn from other voices, people who have higher support needs, people who have other disabilities as well as being autistic, people who are from racialized or otherwise marginalized communities that I'm not a part of. Finding out I'm autistic and going down those paths, I think, has really helped me start to recognize and start to catch some of those things in my own behavior.
Sure. So much there that's so fascinating. I mean, just starting with what you were saying around the pattern recognition of social behavior and how that's a strength. And I can so see how that would be. And I'm just struck by the irony of it that, so often, and as you kind of said, like autism can often be seen as like a social inhibitor, right? And can act and serve that way that, it makes you struggle to engage socially in different dynamics. But it can also actually make you much, much better in some of them but it's in a different way. It's applying, you're just applying a different part of yourself
I'm
to a
learning and
situation.
applying a set of rules as opposed to just sort of
Exactly.
knowing how to navigate something.
Yeah, and and sort of feelings and it's less maybe perhaps empathetic and more algorithmic almost in a, right? But I mean, but it works and we all work differently and the end state is that you're connecting with humans and understanding their needs and, aligning them and that's incredible. So I think that's such an interesting and I think it serves also to your second point around the idea of like it was called the
Social of disability.
social model of disability. Yeah, what fascinating and so true. Like that, yeah, that it's sort of created the barriers are what we see, right? And what we create around us. It reminds me of like I think there was a book around like I can't remember what it's called. It was like Average Doesn't Exist, and it was just talking about sort of the mythical average person that we've designed the world around, and how so many of the things that are challenging exist because we created the world for an imaginary person. And how inclusive design can not only help to solve a lot of those things for everybody, but often creates a better experience. Because I will tell you, like me shopping at Loblaws as a quote unquote neurotypical person in heavy fluorescent lighting and cranked up top 40. I mean, I guess it depends on the top 40. Some of them are bangers, but like, that's not always an optimal experience for any of us. Like I would take soft lighting in the, produce aisle. So I'm curious to know now that you are, T minus 9 months from 40 and entering this second half and now walking into it equipped with a whole new understanding of yourself. How do you think the next part of your life will be different from the first part given this new information that you have?
I think it's going to take me a really, really long time to unwind all of this stuff. Like you said, there was a journey to get here. There was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of misunderstanding. There was a lot of self-judgment and external judgment. So trying to unpack and process and work through all of that, I think it's something that I've started. I've been in therapy for 20 years, but only recently learning I'm autistic. I've sort of pivoted to work with someone who more specializes in that area and can give me some different strategies. I think I'm going to continue focusing on working through all of these things, but like with the autism lens that I didn't have to work with before. I am also going to, and this is an ongoing journey for me, is to try and accommodate myself and to give myself more grace and understanding than I have in the past.
Yeah.
Like if I'm tired and overwhelmed and just really don't feel like going to a social event that I've said I'm going to go to, instead of powering through and burning myself out and getting cranky and irritable and taking that out on my husband and whoever else, I'm going to just say, no, I'm not up for it, and stay home with my podcast and tree staring instead.
And your fluffy cat.
And my fluffy cat, my beautiful cat. Why she hasn't wandered in yet. Usually she's very much underfoot. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try and keep trying to let myself off the hook for that stuff. It's important to me that even if something in my behavior is being driven by autism, that doesn't mean that I'm not accountable for it. So if I'm being a complete jackass to my husband because I'm overwhelmed and burnt out, some of that might be beyond my conscious control. But recognizing what I'm doing, stopping myself, and apologizing for the harm that I've done is something that I'm trying to do more. I'm incredibly stubborn. So, trying to convince me that what I've said is wrong, or the way I said it was wrong, or I could have approached something differently, or, I've hurt someone's feelings, but really that's on them, not me, because they took it wrong. I'm really trying to flip the script on some of that and take ownership and accountability of how my behavior is affecting others. Because even though it's sometimes related to the neurotype that I have, it is still not, it's not a free pass to just do whatever I want and behave however I want all the time. So I'm continuing to try and work on all of my relationships through that lens, and to take more seriously what people say to me about how I'm impacting them, or if they're pointing out patterns in my behavior, just to really take that feedback for what it is. I'm also hoping to get more active in the disability rights space. I feel very strongly about how unaccommodating and how many barriers there are in every sense of the word in our society. So some of it is really little. Some of it is like asking a restaurant to turn down the music because it's too loud for me to focus on a conversation. Some of it is wearing light earplugs when I'm at a busy reception so I can still follow the conversation but not have to deal with all that garbage. And I've been thinking more about how to take that out into the world. There are a lot of cis, white, almost middle-aged, low support needs, autistic women out there loudly with platforms. There are too many of them. As much as learning about autism and neurodiversity is really new for a lot of people, those voices have been dominating the public conversation. So I am trying to, in small ways, find ways to amplify other voices with different perspectives as well. People with higher support needs, people whose meltdowns are criminalized rather than supported. At the end of the day, I don't really know how I'm going to turn a lot of that into action, but it is something that I'm actively thinking about what I can do to sort of spread the word and help educate people. I think for me, talking about it and being open about it is a good first step. Every year on my sober anniversary, I post something on social media, 6 years today. Sometimes I say a little more about it. Sometimes I don't. Every time I do that, I have at least one or two people who reach out to me and say, hey, thanks for posting that. I think I might need some help. How did you go about XYZ? How do I know if I have a problem? Where can I go? All that stuff. So if even one or two people hearing me talk about autism decide to look into it for themselves and it can maybe change their life in the way that it's changed mine, then to me, that's a victory.
Incredible. Absolutely. I mean, I can tell you, just listening and knowing so many people in my life, I always share my podcast, but there are a whole bunch of people I will send this one specifically to because I think that they'll find it just so powerful to hear someone talk so, so openly and just with such, I don't know if confidence is quite the right word, but just comfort in who you are now, and that, and sort of really owning that identity and owning those pieces of it and just explaining it to others. And the experience is just, it's a really incredible thing. And I'm excited to see where you take this next, because I think starting by sharing stories is always the right place to start. And like you said, once you start putting your own stories out there, it's incredible how people start to reach back out. So, I have one last question for you as we're thinking about the future and what the next phase will bring. And it's the question I ask everyone at the end, which is, we always are asked to give our younger selves advice. But since we're looking into the future, what advice would you give to your future self? And what words do you hope she lives by?
Advice that I would give to my future self is, remember that even though things can be really hard and, learning this about myself and working through it has been really hard. Try and remember that there is almost always some good in it too. So for me, the good in this is I know who I am. I know what's driving me. I can let myself off the hook for a lot of those long-standing labels like drama queen, overreacting, all that kind of stuff. So when you're in the midst of it, it can be hard to not find the silver linings. I think that's a bit trite, but there's always some good to be found. So I think my future self remind her to remember that fact. And advice that I'm hoping to live by now is to just be open and empathetic to other people and their experiences. I think that having differences in the way that I am makes me more willing to give people grace or give them the benefit of the doubt when they're doing something that I and others might find annoying or strange or upsetting. Now that I know as much about autism as I do, I can't unsee it. I can list 5 or 10 people in my life who I look around and I'm like, yep, that person could benefit from an autism assessment. That person could benefit from an autism assessment. And I would never say that to them unless they asked. That's not my place. I don't walk around, a party of my drunk friends and say, I think you're an alcoholic. I think you're an alcoholic. I think you're an alcoholic. So I'm not going to start doing that about neurodiversity either. But just knowing that you're surrounded by people whose minds and inner lives you know very little about. So don't assume the worst. Don't assume moral failings. Don't assume bad intentions. Just either give them grace if you have it within you, or at the very least, try and walk away and assume they're just having a bad day.
I love that. I think that's so powerful. And again, you might not walk around, telling people you think that they need an autism assessment, but the more that you just share your own story, the more people will start to perhaps ask that question of themselves. And I think that's so powerful. Well, Kate, thank you so much for coming on the show today and telling your story with so much just courage and honesty. It's a really powerful to hear. And I know that our listeners are going to really appreciate listening to it.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to talk about it.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.
All right, that's our show. Thank you to Kate for being such an amazing guest and sharing your story so openly. I think there are a lot of people listening who will be touched by it. Thank you again to our sponsor, Habit Coffee Club. Visit www.habitcoffeeclub.com and use the promo code midpoint at checkout for 20% off your first purchase. That's it for our show today. We'll see you